Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your goodness and all your mercy toward us. Showers of blessing, showers of blessing,
Showers they fall when we love and live in unity, when we live one voice, loud and strong. Praise the Lord,
praise the Lord.
praise the Lord, praise the Lord.
We praise
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
praise the Lord.
Praise the
Bless your name. God, we bless your name. Oh, we do, we do.
Good morning and welcome to Spirit of God Fellowship Online. Thank you so much for joining with us. One of the great thrills of our having church online is that you get a chance to worship with us, worship Jesus Christ and the Father. So thanks again for joining us. We have some good news. One item of good news is that Ray Banks is home. Many of you have been following Ray Banks and praying for him and lifting him up, and your prayers have been answered. He's finally home. He's been making steady progress after being in the hospital for weeks. And so thank you so much for your prayers. His family thanks you for your prayers. So keep praying though for Ray. We want to see complete and total healing come to him and visit his body. So thank you. Another item of big news is that Spirit of God Fellowship will begin holding services in our building on July 26th. This is something we've been so much longing for, looking towards, meeting together as a group. Now, leading up to this, on July 12th and 19th, we will have outdoor services. So we won't be meeting in the building, we'll be meeting outdoors on our grassy lawn area. And that's going to be just a great time where we'll see one another again and worship Jesus Christ together. So we can't wait to see everyone. There will be more details to follow. In fact, one of the details will be a public announcement video that will take you on a journey through showing up in our parking lot, walking you through our doors and into the sanctuary where you will be seated by helpers. And so we want to make it clear that you will be safe, you will be accommodated just during those times where we gather together and worship. So look for that as well. Now today, we're going to continue a conversation that started several weeks ago that involved Brian, our pastor, John Arrington, one of our youth leaders, and myself, Matthew James. So we started that conversation. It was a conversation about race and the church and what God was after in all of us. We're going to continue that conversation today. Today's guest will be Brian Phil Tarver, pastor of United Faith Center Ministries International, and Dr. Carl E. King Sr., pastor of Christ Community Church. They will continue this conversation and take it into different realms and different areas today. So you will enjoy this. Now, just before I turn things over to Brian and to his guests, let me read you a passage of scripture from Galatians 3. For in Christ Jesus, you are all sons of God through faith. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female. for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So this is the good news, is that in Christ Jesus, there is supernatural unity that comes to us. And we want to live in that unity, and we want to demonstrate that unity to you today as well. So let's just turn our attention to Brian and his guests. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and welcome to Spirit of God Fellowship Online. Yes, as we've been saying for over 3 months now, we are online, and we hope someday soon, as Matthew announced, we're going to do some outdoor services in July, and we are really looking forward to it. But listen, I'm so blessed. I am so blessed to have my brothers here with me, my dear, dear brothers, Pastor Phil Tarver. Thank you so much for coming on, Pastor Phil. He's an old friend to all of us, pastor of United Faith Center. Dr. Carl King, thank you so much.
Good to be here.
We appreciate you, pastor, of course, of Christ Community Church. Again, just thank your dear wives, Dr. Jean King, First Lady Vondria. Thank you for lending that you guys to us this morning. And so here we are. We've got a lot of history together, don't we? I was thinking about this, and when I asked you to come on and have a conversation, this is part two, I was so thrilled and blessed because I look back on our years. We were talking earlier. I think, Dr. King, I think you and I have been together the longest, maybe, I don't know, we're getting older, right? So
Right,
30 years, I don't know.
At least, because Pierre and Donata were here.
That's right.
And members of the church.
That's
so
right.
it goes back.
Goes way back.
Way back.
And how many times has your mom and dad been with us?
Oh,
and,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And Phil, I'm thinking time flies, but I'm thinking we're 20 years
Yes, yes.
at least.
Yeah, it's been great, and as you said, the time has flown through music, worship,
Yes.
eventually, and now both of us coming into the pastoral. It's amazing.
And you had to mention that, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm the new one here.
Had to get that in, yeah.
And thank you for mentioning that, because you know, as I was thinking about this, I'm gonna be shutting up here very quickly because I want to listen. But I do have to say, because when you mentioned that, I'm thinking to myself, I hate to say it this way, but we buried people together.
Yes.
We have fellowship together. We've had dinners together. I don't know how many times we've been together, as you said, worshiping together. Our churches have met together, and it's been a beautiful thing. And as you mentioned that, you know, John Sullivan, dear John, has died. It's been 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
And then when I was ordained in, I think it was late March, I remember both of you were there. Both of you said some nice things, and again, thank you. So lots of history here.
We do.
I think it's a good place to be, and I'm glad we're talking. So this is part two. A few weeks ago, we had Matthew James, who you know. He's an African-American, one of my best friends in the world, African-American individual in our church, an elder, one of our main elders. He was here. And then our co-youth leader, John Arrington Jr.
Yeah.
I said to him, I'm so glad you're our youth leader. He's phenomenal. And so he was here, young African-American young man, wonderful. So he was here, and we just talked. I listened, because we have to listen. And they talked. And so that's what we're doing this morning. You know, I stated a few weeks ago, we're a multicultural church. We are. We have been from the very beginning. But we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. So here we go. We are in the middle of ongoing protests that are related to racial inequality, protests that are related to much deeper than just that phrase, much deeper. And they're ongoing. And so let's talk. I'm going to listen. Let's talk. So
Sure.
These recent weeks, what happened? What started with the shooting, and more shootings as we've talked, more violence, more senseless stuff. All right. How has this affected you guys personally? I guess maybe we'll start with Dr. King on the. Well, Dr. King, how are you doing? How are you doing in all this? What's happening?
Well, for me, it's kind of a mixed bag. The shootings are, there's this atrocity. It's sinful, it's evil. But the reason why I say a mixed bag, I'm also the chaplain for the police department for South
Oh,
Holland.
wow. Yeah, I forgot about that.
And so I know them individually as men and women who they're coming to a job. And they're happy at the end of the shift if they leave walking and not on a stretcher. Things are rough out there, but you're going to have some rogue cops. Not every, you'd love to have 100% that are giving 100%. And what I do, even in our devotions, is I remind them that we have similar kinds of responsibilities. Mine is as a pastor to serve and protect. Theirs is to serve and protect. And so it's a ministry. And if they can just keep that in their minds when they get on the streets. And then what I used to do before the COVID came in and the safe distancing, I would do ride-alongs. And just so that they could unpack and de-stress. But it also gave me a chance to see the community like I've never seen the community. And so
The community of South Holland.
of South Holland,
Yes.
right. And so there's some seedy areas, you know, where you have problems. It's problematic. I'll put that term instead of seedy. Problematic areas. But, you know, you have officers that are putting their lives on the line. So it's this mixed bag for me. It's this tension, knowing that they have this responsibility to serve and protect, and they never know what they're going to encounter. And then, on the other side, on the other hand, you have cops that abuse their authority and forget that they're there to serve. And then there's this, because of not seeing their role as a ministry, the relationship. I've always been a proponent for community policing. And so you get to know the officers walking a beat, walking an area, or driving or riding a bike in there, but getting to know the families and really be a community, more so than just the one day a year where you have the community coming out for hot dogs and hamburgers and that sort of thing. So, but this is the sad thing. Whether a chaplain or a pastor or not, am cautious when I encounter an officer. Have my hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, and know that there's many times a different way, a different encounter if I was Caucasian. That if I'm Caucasian, I don't have to worry about my life being on the line because of a traffic stop. But if I'm black, I do. And so I have one son and 2 son-in-laws, and I preach to them, don't cause an altercation by your tone, mannerism. Just answer the questions, provide the information, and get moving.
You know, I want to stay with you, Dr. King, just for a little bit, but you just went to an area that we went to 3 weeks ago. That whole, what is it, you say 10 and 2?
10 and 2.
Yeah. Matthew shared an experience that one of his sons had. John shared some stuff. And so I'm sitting here. So I'm Caucasian. And so I'm listening to you. Now, I know you. We've discussed these things. But I'll bet you there's people out there saying, oh, come on. What do you mean? It's different for you being pulled over. Oh, no. See, we're not in your shoes, are we? And it happens, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So I appreciate you bringing it out. That's a real deal, isn't it?
Because, see, you never know whether even the stop was legitimate. So sometimes it's profiling. You're in the, and I shouldn't say wrong area, but in their mind, there's certain people, colors, and conditions of cars that should be in certain areas. And so profiling, it's not uncommon in past history for an officer to pull you aside and then give you this litany of questions. Where are you going? Why are you here? That's none of your business, really. Did I violate the law? And if I didn't violate the law, then why are you stopping me?
Well, white people living on another planet will say, oh, come on, that doesn't happen. But I'm glad you're bringing it out again, because it does happen, and it's wrong. Plug for that movie, what's that Michael B. Jordan movie, No Justice or Just?
Yeah, that was,
Ju-
I think it was Fruitvale Station. Well, it was one movie he was in where he was a character
Yeah,
that was accosted by the police.
it started with that
Yeah.
type of a thing. We have plenty of time here, so we're really relaxed. Dr. King, I asked you how are you doing? You and I have had a long relationship. We've always talked about this type of thing. You know, how do we improve race relations? And we've done it, I think, by meeting together as churches. But how about you yourself? Has this awakened pain in your own life? You know, bad memories, and is it like your worst nightmare again? Here it is again, and we.
Yeah. How do I put it? You know, I'm older and tired of this kind of, if I can just be frank, stuff.
Please do. Yeah.
I'm tired of it. It's you know, it's the question, how long, and you know, how long this night. I've never, I shouldn't say never. Initially, early on, an awakening happened. I was a student at Purdue, and I remember wanting to have race relationships, strong relationships, or better relationships. And I remember talking to some engineers. They were studying engineering, and they had these false concepts of Freud and Darwin and African Americans. And I'm thinking, here you're going out into the world. You're about ready to graduate. You have some of you are working on advanced degrees, and you have this almost retarded thinking. What happened to your education? I'm thinking that people would be further along. And then even in my adult years, and so for a bit, I kind of just gave up on racial reconciliation. And particularly, even though I have white friends and that sort of thing, but as a whole, I remember my son-in-law saying that he wanted to be a part of a movement, and this was years ago, and so he went out to Willow at the time. And I said, and I was a little bothered that he was going, he was leaving me, but I said, listen, there'll be a point in time where you'll get tired of, you know, this venture that you're on, and you'll come back to reality. The church is always open for you. Well, he didn't come back, but he did realize that things were far more complex. And I'll deal with the complexity later on in our discussion.
Okay.
And what we can do.
Yeah, and you're talking about Steve, right? Not a bad musician, right?
And now the worship leader at Willow, Chicago.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phil, how are you doing? What is this doing inside? What of your deep spirit?
Sure.
What's happening?
Brian, I'll have to admit, from a very personal viewpoint, now it's been, I think, a month, maybe a month and a week or so since the death of George Floyd. It's been a haze. It really has. Very mixed emotions, extreme anger, incredible sadness. And I'm just going to frame what I say through that particular lens. In that, as Dr. King said, I'm really glad he started us off. By now, you would figure we'd be further down the road.
Yeah.
When I moved into South Holland now, this year makes 18 years. We came here to us, South Holland, and I know we're going to go there a little bit later,
That's right.
but it was a bit of an idyllic town. It was, compared to the towns surrounded, and no disparage to those different towns. I pastor in Harvey, and we all know the challenges that Harvey has. But moving into South Holland was like moving into, lack of a better word, a utopia.
Utopia, yeah. I was thinking the same word.
It was, and again, when you come into that sort of framing, then you're looking at, wow, we're great. What's going on with the rest of the world?
Right.
And so with that and with the death of George Floyd, it kind of gave me, as Dr. King alluded to, it kind of gave me a moment of pause to say, okay, the world is not so great. The world is not as bright as we thought it would be, as we see it through the eyes of South Hollanders. I've had the privilege of raising 2 boys, one married now, 3 kids, and the oldest 33 years. And I've been blessed that neither one of them has spent a day in jail.
Yeah.
I don't think that either one of them have been stopped by police that it was something to the effect of it being a major issue. And so again, in my life, I tend to view things maybe somewhat differently than most, yet I feel the pain as an African American. I have been stopped by police. I have had to do, as Dr. King say, the 10 and the 2. I've been stopped for absolutely no reason at all. Another piece of profiling is me being who I am, and we'll say this quite humorously, 6'7". At one time, thank God, I'm a little smaller now, but over 300 pounds. And sort of a big fella.
Yeah.
When I would walk into a store, to be followed around by security. When you step into an elevator, a Caucasian woman clutching her purse just a little bit tighter.
And you see,
walking
and
down the
this
street,
happens.
this happens.
Yes, of course it does.
regularly.
Of course it does. But I
It
think
does.
I'm
It
glad you're
does.
mentioning this.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so you walk by a woman, she's going to clutch
Yes.
that purse again because of the unfortunate situation. But I look at it like this: when I saw George Floyd with the knee on his neck, I saw him, of course, as an African American. But to me, the way I view the world, it could have been anybody, and I would have been as devastated as I was to see a person be executed. Technically on live television with
Yeah.
social media now,
Yeah.
and as it's played out around the world, and it just wrecks you. Caucasian, Asian, Latino, African American, it could have been anyone. To see that type of thing happening in a brand new now decade of a new century. As Dr. King said, I thought we were further down the road, but we find out that we're not. And I think the thing that has happened in subsequent weeks, because I've had to now, again, because of the way my family makeup is and because we don't experience that kind of thing as much, I've had to teach my wife. My wife is, why is all this happening? Because she's not used to it. My children are like, okay, it's tough out there, but we've never really experienced this, by the grace of God, that sort of thing. And so now it becomes a learning curve. I've got the history and I understand, where we come from. But with my family, it becomes a learning curve. And so again, with us, it's been a very painful time.
It has been.
The thing that has been the toughest, Brian and Dr. King, has been this: not just to see George Floyd die a month ago, but to see it happening again.
Right.
And again,
Since-
and again,
since
since.
George-
And of
you
course,
and I
prior
talked
to
about
that,
that.
we have Ahmaud Arbery,
Yes.
and then we have Breonna Taylor,
Yeah.
Right.
and again, probably countless others that we've heard about in the news, and not necessarily given as much attention to until this moment. George Floyd's daughter said something, and I think she's probably about maybe 7, 8 years old, so she may have been coached to say it, but she said something very powerful. They filmed her, and she said, "What do you think about my daddy? What do you think about your daddy, baby?" And she said, "My daddy changed the world." And he did. Just by dying on the street, the world woke up. And that's what we are.
That's, and you mentioned the white woman clutching her purse. That could
it's
be
coming.
that
It's
could
coming.
be a third conversation because that's ingrained, right? That's deep. I mean, that's an interesting thing because it happens, doesn't it?
It does.
That is a deep thing
does.
that has been put inside. Why would she just clutch her purse when you walk in? Well, that's deep.
Would it be the reaction with someone my size,
Yeah, yeah.
but another color?
Yeah,
Would you have the same reaction? And so again, that is
probably not.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that again goes back to where we are. And so I'm sure we'll probably discuss it, but it goes into just the foundation and the fabric
Yeah.
of all of us here.
I think we'll move into a different topic, similar but different. But we hang out a lot together, the three of us. So I know you won't hear me wrong when I say this, because you did mention that an African American person could be pulled over just for no reason.
Yeah.
Now let me state the obvious that I think we all agree, because I've been pulled over for good reasons. It's not that if you're speeding, you could be pulled over, right? I think we would agree. So if an African American is pulled over because they're speeding, okay.
Yeah.
That's not the issue here.
Yeah.
They're pulled over for no reason. That is heavy stuff, I think.
You haven't broken the law.
Yeah.
But you are pulled over.
And that goes on.
Yeah.
Time and time again.
Let's see your license, insurance.
Yeah.
The question is asked, and Dr. King, I'm sure, could speak to it. You know, you're pulled over. You ask for your papers, and the question that we'll probably ask, and the way I tend to address, and another thing I'll say too as well, just to touch on something that Dr. King says, we would tend to, and not that we have to, but I think it's just ingrained, as Dr. King would have said, that when we are pulled over, I think our decorum changes. We're a little less relaxed.
Sure.
We straighten up. There is more of a, good evening, officer, how can I help you? What's wrong? That sort of thing. And so you have to address just common things that happen.
So let's talk about your churches. Let's stick with you, Pastor Phil, and then Dr. King. We talked about yourselves, and thank you, because it's just to hear you guys, because I know you guys. We hang out, and to hear there's anger, there's hurt, there's like how long. I'm glad you're talking, because and again we're listening. So how about your church? You pastor, you shepherd a church. How are they doing? What are they saying? What are you doing with the church?
I like you said, you mentioned you pastor a multicultural congregation. My hope one day. But that said, primarily African American church, and again the pain is there. Some of them from our congregation, some of the members of our congregation, again in pain, and they express it in very hurtful ways. They're angry. You know, I am more of a docile person by nature, more docile myself, but there's some who are more aggressive. And there are those who have said something needs to be done about it. And so it is discussing it with them and bringing them to a point where we can sit down and have a discussion and not take to the streets.
Yes.
And a lot of that we have seen, unfortunately, over the last month,
Yes.
particularly the week that George Floyd was killed, where you see the looting and the rioting, and you ask the question, why is this happening? I certainly want to kick out to Dr. King to share on that point, because he's got the historical perspective, I'm sure, all the way back to Dr. King, concerning that. Why would people become so angry that they would tear up and loot and tear down, in particular in your own area? You would wonder, if I'm going to tear down a laundromat, where am I going to wash my clothes? If I'm going to loot and raid a Walgreens, where am I going to get my prescriptions? If I'm going to raid, tear down, burn down a grocery store, a restaurant, where am I going to eat? But the anger is like, I use it as this description, it's like a pot that's boiled over. When the pot boils over, the water's going to go somewhere. And because this has been simmering for so long, the pot has now boiled over. And you just can't, it's hard to put that back into its container, so to speak. And that's where we are I believe as a people.
And you've been taught, so your church, you're talking, and that's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're expressing the pain and the hurt and things like that.
Absolutely.
Dr. King, what's happening at Christ Community? What's going on?
Well, we haven't done anything collectively.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for me to put a gauge. I just know that there's frustration, there's anger, there's hurt. And even when you're looking at the protesters, and what people are encouraging is that there's more peaceful protesting, but when you've had it and enough is enough, protesting cannot just be controlled, and it doesn't look pretty all the time. There's the ugly side of protest, and so I'm not advocating violence and looting and riotous action, but I understand it. Whether in the 60s, and you had Black Panthers that had, their rifles, and so Malcolm X by whatever means necessary. Martin Luther King was becoming more radical in his thinking and his positioning. And so the thought is we want to see progress. And we know that America, whether with the British, whether with the natives, whether with Mexico, has its history of being violent in protesting. So the thought is what will move things along. The thing that, but it does grieve you when you're in your community. I remember when it came out here into the Calumet City area and South Holland area, and I was going down Torrance and turning onto 159th Street, and I'm seeing the looting. And my wife, I'm telling her story, the mother, the black mother, if you will, in her, she wanted to get out of the car and tell the looters, put that stuff back. But then she recognized, wait a minute, I don't have a relationship with these people. Let me get back in the car.
And I'm glad I'm glad she didn't venture out there, but anyway.
But it did sadden me to see it, but I understood why it was happening. Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about the town a little bit, South Holland. Again, there's no reason to, you can't have conversations and expect progress if we just hide around and we just tap dance around things. You know? So I'll say it. I'll just come out and say it. We all know the history of the town. You alluded to it, Pastor Phil. So South Holland has deep roots and good things. You know, maybe Phil, you can mention a little bit about what was shared last night.
Sure.
So there were some very good things about the Underground Railroad.
Underground Railroad.
I'll let you maybe comment a little bit more about it. But
Sure.
But South Holland as a town changed. It changed when the white flight, and I think we just say it that way. Why say it any other way?
Because it's true.
It's
right.
true.
Right.
It came from what, Roseland and that area to South Holland. So South Holland was mostly white, if not all white, I would imagine all white. So it changed. And then again, African Americans started moving in. I don't even know when that was. Was it the 80s or?
The real, when
When
faith,
African Americans started coming in, yeah.
when you're talking about in South Holland?
Yeah, moving in.
Yeah, I think that Faith Church, when it left and went to Dyer, was like a vacuum, and
Yeah.
there was a host of individuals that relocated out there into that area. So that was the late '90s, early, because I bought the church in 2002.
So when I'm just saying, so I'm saying when as African Americans moved into South Holland again, and for whatever reason, we're not here to debate good reasons, bad reasons, wrong motives. That's not our debate today. But again, there was a second wave of white flight. I think that's accurate. Yet, I love South Holland. You love South Holland.
Absolutely.
And so we had a peace walk last night. And so let's talk about South Holland. Again, Pastor Phil, what about South Holland? What can we do in South Holland? How do you think we're doing? We've had, by the way, we've had diversity dinners. We've had unity concerts.
Yeah, the events, again, with me being a new South Hollander and moving into the area in 2000, same year Dr. King bought the church, 2002 is when I moved into South Holland, and seeing things that would happen like the unity fellowships of the churches, 4th of July weekend, that was a staple for South Holland Ministerial. And to see things like that were just brand new and absolutely beautiful gatherings, unity dinners, all that sort of thing. And so again, it gave the town a bit of an idyllic feel. And the history, something was brought up last night, which is mentioning
share a
last
little
night
bit
with the
more about
unity walk. And I'd seen something like that because there are a couple of books. Of course, there are books on the history of South Holland, but I saw something at one time I picked up in a library. And I was reading up on South Holland to find out that South Holland played a role in the Underground Railroad and how it was a stop for individuals to come through, and I can't remember at this time the exact family that was hosting individuals who were coming up from the South, but South Holland had that stamp on it as being a part of the freedom movement during slavery.
So you
and
had
so
white
you can say, yeah,
people risking their lives.
exactly,
That's
exactly,
good.
exactly. And it was
But
framed
that's-
by the pastor shared last night as individuals who really had nothing to do with it at all. They were immigrants.
Yeah.
You know, they had no stake. They were new to the country. So to be able to do that, and for somebody you did not know, was absolutely fantastic. And so, of course, as an African American, that makes me feel great. We've got that rich history. To our current times, again, I was a product of kind of I'll say this, by the way of Chicago Heights through Roseland, because I bought my first house in the Heights, stayed out there for a few years, moved back to the West Pullman area, and eventually the house opened up for us in South Holland. And so I'm a product of that flight that's coming in. I lived next door at that time. I don't know if you remember Bill Stegenga.
Oh, yes, of course.
Bill Stegenga was my neighbor
Yes.
at that time. And so, again, enjoying the privilege of living in a town that was absolutely great. I think that the thing that we've looked to do here in South Holland is foster unity in many different areas. The challenge for African Americans is this, and we probably could frame it in a number of different ways, but I think that at the end of the day, all we want is just to be equal, to be treated equally, to be treated fairly. And we see, unfortunately, in the different events that have happened and that continue to happen, that there is this ongoing unfair treatment. And I like the term that was used earlier, the term rogue, because we know that Brian, you and I have history, others in, in our community, we have history. Our great mayor, who was looked to foster unity during his tenure. We have a history, again, of people coming together and looking to unify in the midst of being different. We have. But then there are the rogues. And it is the rogues that continue to make things difficult as we foster racial reconciliation. So,
Yeah,
I mean, again, South Holland's a great place to live.
Yeah, Dr. King, how do you think we're doing in South Holland? And then I think what we'll do is we'll segue to maybe our final topic of where do we go from here? But I just have to say, again, we had this peace walk last night. Both of you guys were excellent. I loved it, and I thought Alfonso was great. The mayor was great. Who's the young lady from?
Dr. Carmen Frederick James.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Yeah.
Covenant. Outstanding from Covenant, from Dr. Smith's, Ozzie Smith's church, and excellent. So it was a good night. And I loved your opening, by the way. And you began with a phrase. You began with 400 years of, right?
Right, of pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Right. But getting back to South Holland,
Yeah.
if I gave a grade, I'd have to give a high grade because the leadership and the intentionality of the village president, or the mayor, we call him, in picking good staff, qualified, and the theme, it's not just the mayor, and it's not just the staff. I believe that when you put God first, it makes a world of a difference. And so the fathers of this village came up with the theme, faith, family, and future. I don't know of a village or municipality, and I've worked with, I was the Director of Community and Economic Development for Calumet City, and so it allowed me to see a number of municipalities. I don't know in this country a village or municipality that has that theme. And it's not just a theme in name, but it's something that the village actively seeks to carry out. So when we pray at the village gates, when we have this collaborative relationship between clergy, and I'm glad that Pat Mahan is invited in. She's an invited guest.
Yes.
And well, she's now taken on the role of not just a guest, but a participant, a voter. That doesn't happen. Here I was a pastor, but I was invited to the Calumet City meetings. I didn't vote, I didn't have a voice, except I gave information. But this village does things a little differently. The relationship that the leadership has with the Lord means a world of a difference. And so I'd have to give South Holland high marks in that. Now, we still have a ways to go. So leadership is high. Economically, it concerns me when we had, I don't know, 6 to 8 car dealerships to leave the community and follow the flight. That hit the pockets of the residents and the administration. When I think educationally, the school system, 205.
Yeah. Of which you were president of that board.
I was president of the board.
205.
Of 205. And so concerned about our children. Education opens doors or provides opportunities. If you don't have a good education, it limits your options. And so I'm concerned about our children coming from middle school or elementary school and then coming to high school with a 3rd and 4th and 5th grade reading level. What does that say? That sends a sign up to the criminal justice system to start building prisons.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of work to do. And so I'll wait for the last question that you have.
Well, and oh man, we could sit here all day because that is, you just reminded me of, you know, the economic situations we have to work on and education.
Yes.
And you were intimately involved in it. Man, that is a whole nother topic. Well, all right. So we've talked about a lot of stuff. So where do we go? So, okay, protests are ongoing for good reasons. But at some point, I think I could say at some point the protesting, I don't want to say needs to stop, should stop. It will stop, and then action needs to occur. I hope
Absolutely.
that's okay to say it that
Absolutely.
way, but I don't know, maybe I'm saying it wrong. But I guess what I'm saying is there has to be a transition.
Right.
So let's say it that way.
Okay.
So where do we go? What do we do, guys? What do we do? Dr. King, let's stay with you, and then we'll go
All
to
right.
Bill.
Okay. I think 3 things. One, racism is a sin. And so we need to personally be accountable or repentant. The Bible tells us that the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? And so dealing with personal sin and recognizing a part of personal sin is how I look at my brother or my sister in a negative light or disparaging light. I don't give them enough credence. I buy into the negative stereotypes that are given, and I'll which takes me to the next one, is interpersonal relationship or interpersonal sin. So 1 is my personal sin, 2 is interpersonal, how I act out on that sin. And so a part of the woman who clutches her purse when you get on because she maybe a personal sin, someone told her that big black men they want your purse, they're going to rob you.
Sure.
Okay, that's her personal sin. She needed to be delivered from that. Her interpersonal sin is clutching of the purse, as opposed to not changing her posture, if anything, being friendly or welcoming. Good morning. How are you doing? Acknowledging his presence.
Yes.
And so we have a job to do personally, and that's what I heard last night, to act justly, love mercy,
Yes.
and walk.
That's right.
That's dealing with on a
Yes.
personal, right at home, and yes, but it cannot stop there. It continues with interpersonal relationship, and then thirdly, which is so important, is structural sin. When I say structural sin, dismantling, give you an example. What is so bad about reparations? What would that look like now to give people that kind of a boost and somewhat, and I know my friend says you don't want to have a level playing field, but somewhat level that playing field. Or at least correct some things where people have an even shot at it. You see, dismantling racism or institutional racism or structural sin, if you will, is banks not giving community dollars to someone who's right in the community because they say that your credit is weak. Well, but the white guy that came, he had no credit. Well, we know him. We know his family. He'll make good. Two different rules. When I'm looking at education, structural sin there. Why is it that my children or our children in Barrington and
North Shore.
North
Shore. Yeah, got it. Yep.
Even though they've changed how schools are funded now, but for how long? And still, we haven't caught up with where they're at. Health care. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
The criminal justice system. Why is it that a white child might be given a pass, but a black child, they take him right in or her in and they get a record as a juvenile, taken right into the system? And so 3 areas: personal sin, interpersonal sin, and structural sin. We have to deal with those 3 areas. That's where we go.
It's a mouthful. It sounds like a great message, by the way. I'd like you to come and preach it at our church sometime. So I'm serious.
Let me preach it at mine first.
Preach it there first. I'm serious. I want to say one thing, and then
Yes,
Elder
no.
Phil, you're going to have the last word. My mind thinks simply, because when you look at it, it's like overwhelming. Where do we go from here? But I like what you started with. I like all 3 points, but I like where you started with acknowledgement. I heard Don DeGraff, Mayor DeGraff, right? And I think all of us, we have to acknowledge, I'm a racist, or I have hatred in my heart. Okay, can God not forgive that? Can God not restore that?
Yes, he
But
can.
you have to. How does a liar he has to say, I'm a liar, right? I have to acknowledge. I think that's what you're saying,
And,
right?
and there has to be acknowledgement.
I'm just talking about the first part.
Yeah. There has to be acknowledgement on both parts. My father called me this morning and said, I was telling me, he asked, how did things go last night? And he says, you know what, you have to be so careful about the words you use. He says, because I used to hate white folk.
Yeah.
He says, but the Lord spoke to me and said, who's the lesser of the evil? The one who purports or exercises hatred on individuals, or the one who hates the person who did it? Both of them have hatred in their heart.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's why everyone has to acknowledge.
has to acknowledge. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, I agree. But we have to acknowledge.
Right.
Point 2 can't happen until right?
Point 2 won't happen.
Won't. Till point 1. Elder Phil, you're the last word, and then we're gonna. Wow. We
Dr.
could be
King,
here all
as
day.
you just said, has really just lined us up with a mouthful in his comments. I go back to what will probably be, again, it'll be the last word, but it's just the root of the situation. When we look at who we are, all of us as individuals, there's no one in this room or around us who can say that this country belongs to them. We're all immigrants. We all come from somewhere else. And so we, as Dr. King said, to level the playing field in some kind of way, in all of the ways he mentioned, so many others, but the real key ways that he mentioned there, if we could see each other that way and recognize there is enough room for all of us to be who God's called us to be in this country, I think we'll get along just fine. The need for opportunities, as Dr. King shared, African American community, one of the big words is reparations. So you have the apologetic, the sharing of what, well, not necessarily apologetic, but the opportunity to apologize. But then from that point, where do you go from there? When we came out of slavery in the late 1860s, there was the 40 acres and a mule, an opportunity to start. When the slave or the family left the plantation, the government set up a piece where each individual would be given a tract of land and a mule to plow that land.
Yeah, right.
That's the history of it.
Yes.
And so we're at that situation right now where many, when African American community, need their 40 acres and a mule, whether it be through education, job opportunities. He mentioned a big one, which was really revealed during COVID, healthcare, the disparities, and how the leg up is needed so that, again, we all can begin to level the playing field. As Dr. King said, and I often say myself, at the cross of Jesus Christ, the ground is level. There are no big I's, no little U's. There are no big sins. There are no little sins. There's just sin.
Yeah.
And the need to confess it. And he brought up something very powerful I touch on, and I'll be through. The fact that, yes, white Americans have treated black Americans in an unfair way for many, many years, all the way to bringing Africans from Africa into the Americas 400 years ago. We may hate white Americans for what they've done, but then we need to acknowledge the fact that we have hate in our own hearts. And we need to ask the Lord to forgive us for how we've handled it. We've handled it in ways that have not been his way. And that's what it boils down to in the end. How can we act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God? I think that's the goal. If we approach it from that point, I think we'll get where we're trying to go.
I do too. And I think conversations like this, where we're listening, I'm doing much more listening. But I know you well enough. We can also talk. We can. I think these are important. Protests are important. It starts with this type of stuff, and then we've got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Man, I love you so much. You know that.
Thank you.
I wish we weren't in COVID. I could give you a big hug.
Hey,
Social,
high five and a
social distance hug.
right.
And you just did exactly what I think we should do. It's probably the best place. And I've got my glasses, and I'm not ashamed because you've got yours.
Right.
I'm going to tell the both of you, I'm not joining that club yet.
You're not in the club
Not
yet?
yet.
Not yet.
Soon
enough.
Thank you, bless you, love you. We love you as a church, as Spirit of God. I mean, John loved you guys. You know that.
That's my friend, and a mentor. Yeah.
But I think the best place to end this wonderful time, this second conversation of many, many more that we all need to have, is to just read that verse, I think, that we talked about last night. I think I'll do that. It was the theme of our march, our peace march last night, and probably the best way to close. It's Micah 6, verse 8. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you. It's what he requires of all of us. Yes. To do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Well, thanks again. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming, and we'll continue the conversation.